This is David Harvey, and you're listening to the AntiCapitalist Chronicles, a podcast that looks at capitalism through a Marxist lens. This podcast is made possible by democracy at work. So welcome to the AntiCapitalist Chronicles for the third season. It's actually an astonishing and rather difficult moment in which to start to think about doing a whole series of podcasts on what's going on in the world from an anti-capitalist perspective. The first two seasons, I covered quite a lot of ground, and I don't want to go back over that. But I would just like to let you know that an edited written version of a selection of the podcasts from seasons 1 and 2 is about to appear in book form, published by Pluto Press, probably coming out in October. And it's called the AntiCapitalist Chronicles, edited by Chris Caruso and Jordan Camp. I didn't think it was such a great idea to do this book, but actually it turns out it's not a bad thing. So we'll see how it fares. And there will be a book launch sometime in October. Now, this particular moment is very difficult for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the airwaves are, of course, completely saturated and taken up with all the nonsense that Donald Trump spouts, and all of the rebuttals and all of the lies, and there's one sort of drip of a scandal and then another drip. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to retain a focus and find out and think through what would be a reasonable anti-capitalist perspective on exactly what is happening, particularly since the virus has not gone away. The economic consequences of the virus have yet to really be seen. And my own view is that whatever happens in the election in the United States in November, things are going to get extremely difficult after the election. Even if, for instance, Biden comes clearly to power, Trump peacefully leaves, the Republicans lose power in the Senate, the situation by the time we get to next January is likely to be dire, both in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of what is happening to the economy. And at the same time, we have a real problem of exactly how to work politically with the current environment. We can say all kinds of things and say we're in support of this or support of that, but the big issue is to what degree is there likely to be some sort of a real political movement that is likely to shake things up in ways which are pointing to some alternatives to a capitalist restoration, because obviously the powers that be right now are very much concerned with a capitalist restoration. Trump rather over hastily, but even those who kind of recognize that a condition of that restoration is controlling the virus, and that therefore the inability to bring the virus under control is hindering what they're about, that even they are kind of, I think, sort of secretly plotting some kind of restoration, not exactly along the same lines, and probably a restoration which will have to take account of the fact that we have become introduced to new ways of living and being, and introduced to new ways of working. It looks very doubtful to me that we will ever go back to sort of full-time office employment in many areas, in many of these areas, we're likely to find ourselves working from home, and the result is going to be a radical transformation in the economic fates of the engines of capital accumulation as they emerged from the 1980s onwards, which was really the sort of metropolitan economies, the sort of San Franciscos, the Londons, the Paris, the Barcelonas, and Sao Paulos, and all the rest of it. Well, those economic engines have been severely damaged. I don't see them coming back full time. I'm not even sure that something as dramatic as eating out in restaurants and going further than that, the revival of international tourism and the revival of spectacle and the like, which was the foundation of a lot of economic activity and economic expansion from the 1990s onwards. So I think that we're in for a very serious adjustment in the long run, but in the midterm, if you think of the situation next January, we're likely to be in the middle of a second phase, a second coming, if you like, of the virus connected with the flu. We're likely to see the coming home of a lot of the problems which currently are being sort of put on hold. Just an example would be the number of people who are behind on their rent and their mortgages in many, many parts of the world, not just in the United States, but a large number of people have not been able to pay. Landlords, the wealthy ones can ride it out, but a lot of small-time landlords are having difficulties, and that is all likely to sort of start to result in evictions, vacancies, churning in labor markets and in housing markets. And I just imagine next January, if we have a cold spell and difficulties arise in terms of maintaining the flow of heating to low-income apartments and all the rest of it, we will be in a very, very, very difficult, having a very difficult time next January, no matter who wins the election. And in fact, there's a side of me that kind of says, well, maybe if Donald Trump won the election, then he'd be responsible for cleaning it all up. As it is, if Biden wins in this country, he's going to be responsible for cleaning it all up, and it's going to be extremely, extremely hard work. It's going to be very, very difficult, and I don't imagine it's going to be peaceful either. The possibility of sort of uprisings on the right wing, or even maybe even severe traumas coming from the left, that these things are very much on the cards. So this then raises the question as to, well, what does somebody like me, concerned with anti-capitalist politics, say and do in this situation? And the answer is quite simply, I just don't know. I really am a bit lost in terms of how to wage politics at this particular historical moment, how to bring the politics together, in part, of course, because, yeah, I'm still in isolation, I'm still in lockdown, and I'm likely to continue to have to be in lockdown until the new year. Many of us have a difficult time communicating, except via Zoom and except via media such as this. So the idea that there can be some sort of coherent movement and sense of discussion, yes, we are trying to do some of that, but it seems like it's very small beer compared to what is really going to be needed if you're going to sort of use this moment of instability to try to create transformations which are going to be long-lasting and move us away, if you like, from the dynamics of capital accumulation, which are lie behind a lot of this mess. So this is the situation as I see it. And there is one additional point, which is that we are running into, even now, these problems. I've already mentioned problems, for example, of evictions in housing and rental payments and inability we're running into a situation now where we're likely to see mass hunger. We're likely to see perhaps even mass starvation. Now, in a situation of that kind, far be it from me to sit there and say, well, I'm not going to do anything unless it's anti-capitalist. No, people need help. We need to find ways to mobilize that help. If that means validating a certain aspect of the state apparatus, if it means doing things which we need to do with sort of conventional economic means, which are open and which can make it possible. Are we going to go into a sort of charity economy? Are we going to kind of try and come up with expanding the food banks and the meal preparation and all those sorts of things? Are we going to engage in what might be called sort of reformist humanitarian practices? And I think in some ways, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, there is a moral imperative, if you like. And I'm not always sympathetic to moral imperatives, but in this case, I would say there is a moral imperative that we need to help people. And we need to help people through the difficulty of evictions, of hunger, of the sort of unemployment situation, and the financial situation. Having said that, part of that humanitarian instinct, it seems to me, has to be directed towards a taking away, a humanitarian program, if you want to call it that, which is going to be redistributive. Now, redistributive socialism is not my favorite sort of topic, but if there is going to be anything socialistic going on in the next few months, it's going to be redistributive, and it has to be redistributive. It has to be redistributive from the ultra wealthy. It has to be redistributive from the top 10% to the bottom 10 or 20%, because we have a situation where the virus and the economic consequences of the virus have most seriously impacted the bottom 20% of the population, and really become very concentrated in the bottom 10% of the population. In the United States, that bottom 10% is very much about African Americans, and the Black Lives Matter movement is, on the one hand, talking a lot about police brutality and policing of black populations and so on, and quite rightly so. But the other side of it is that of the nearly 200,000 deaths in this country, now nearly 40,000 of them are African American. And I think that this means that Black Lives Matter is about dealing with the impact. And that is an impact which actually continues from the crisis of housing and foreclosures back in 2007, 2008 in this country. During that foreclosure crisis, African American population lost about 80% of its asset values because of the collapse of the housing market. They were just robbed, if you like, of their asset values during that period, and they have had not any time to recover, and they are living in crammed rental occupations, and that is a kind of not the kind of situation which is adequate to deal with social distancing and all the rest of it. So we have a huge concentration within the Latinx population and also the African American population among the bottom 20% of the population that is being most seriously impacted by the virus. At the same time, the top 10%, 20% are, for the most part, doing okay. They can do their work at home. They can get income at home. They very often have salaries. Their salaries continue. They work in banks. They work in, they're reasonably well paid. And so this group in the population has not actually had that much of a hit in terms of economic retrenchment and economic distress. So what we've got is an immediate situation of 10 or 20%, the bottom 10 or 20%, seriously impacted by the virus and seriously impacted economically and seriously impacted socially, in the sense that all of the apparatus of the state, the public health organization, the housing question, the educational system, is clearly biased against them, so that if they have to go for homeschooling, you'll find a family of four will have to share one computer and one internet station. So the inequalities which have been involved in this are strong. The impacts of the inequalities have been strong, but also the increase in inequality. So it's not as if this has just hit an unequal world. It's also helping to deepen those inequalities. And so one of the immediate things that needs to be done at all levels is somehow or other to remedy those unequal impacts and to find some way to try to redistribute in some way resources from those that have to those that have not. And that seems to me to be an imperative, and something which is imperative under the contemporary situation. And this is something that I would support. And even though it is not in itself anti-capitalist and all the rest of it, it is something which is absolutely essential for I think any moral person who kind of thinks, well, we need to help out as much as we possibly can. And this is going to take a lot of changing attitudes and changing, because I don't particularly want to have a super tax put upon me, but on the other hand, I think a super tax put on somebody like me is okay. I think it should happen. I think super tax on a whole range of occupations and incomes is absolutely essential right now, and that super tax should then spend to redistributive in a redistributive way to try to improve the living standards and improve the conditions of life of the bottom 10 or 20%. And I'm speaking here not just simply of the United States, where some of the issues I'm talking about are more emphatic here than they are elsewhere, but I think the same problems arise in Britain, the same problems arise in many European countries, and while some are working through it in a more serious way, I think one of the big issues we've got to face is a redistributive push right now. And it should start right now, which is, of course, part of the frustration of the current conjuncture in the United States. You want it to start right now, but you can't, because you know perfectly well if Biden comes up with a program of the sort that I'm talking about, Trump will be all over it, taking away your freedoms. This is socialism. This is communism. Forget it, and all the rest of it. So, but on the other hand, we have to start working towards exactly how we might do this. And here, I think that a lot of municipalities are having to rethink the nature of the kind of municipal economy which exists. What are the large engines of the preceding economy going to be about? Those engines are stuttering. They're not functioning well. Are there things that can be done in these areas? And what kinds of things can be done? For example, it's not clear to me that office employment is going to come back in the way it is, which means there's going to be a lot of empty office spaces around. And you can already see it. You already see a lot of housing, which is, I think not really fully occupied, which is the sort of middle income housing. And I think that what we're starting to see is a kind of a crisis of real estate development, a crisis. Now, cities like New York have been through this sort of thing before. And one of the things that happened back in the 1970s, when there was a dire situation in the New York property market, was that properties essentially were turned over to the population in some ways. When you can still talk to people who live rent free in a Soho apartment because the landlords and the owners would rather have it occupied than unoccupied and squatted. So this is a so we may see a radical adjustment in which there can be also social movements which start to take back the city, because the city is essentially being taken over by the billionaire class and by the CEOs and all the rest of it. And here in New York, we had just recently a collective letter from something like, I don't know, 160 CEOs of the major companies located in New York. And that collective letter basically said to the mayor, look, the city is deteriorating. The quality of life is bad. There are too many homeless people on the streets. There are too much garbage not being picked up. The city is deteriorating. It doesn't look like the city we want to live in. So this is, if you like, the CEO class kind of saying, "Hey, Mr. Mayor, get this city back and make it look like the way it should be for us, the billionaire class." Well, actually, I think I'm not a great fan of the current mayor of New York, but on the other hand, I think that there, at the same time, we should also be asking a question: how would the population in general in New York want to see New York rebuilt and refigured in a way which is good for them? And is good for them in the sense that it's going to provide for affordable housing. It's going to deal with the problems of evictions. It's going to deal with the problem of failing rents and all the rest of it. So this is, if you like, what it seems to me where we are at. And to be honest, I like to talk with people about many of these issues and the like, but it's very difficult to see how to construct a social movement right now when many of us, still under lockdown. And that means as means of communication become significant, uh, forms of communication become significant, but those forms are not really adequate to the formation of a political and social movement, which is going to stand behind this redistributive mechanisms. And these redistributive mechanisms should be implemented now, for the reason I mentioned, that by next January it will be too late. We will be in the middle of a disaster. There will be, in the United States, there will be serious hunger. There are stories now coming out of what's happening in Latin America, what's happening in Africa and everywhere else, where there may be mass famines emerging in those parts of the world, and the traditional sort of philanthropy context that is attempted to deal with that will not be powerful enough or able enough to do anything about that. So there has to be some level of international discussion, some level of national and local agreement about a redistributive package which is going to ward off hunger, mass hunger, is going to ward off mass penury, and is going to start to sort of rebuild the cities, rebuild the society, rebuild the employment structures in a way which is going to actually be helpful in the current conjuncture. That's about the best that I can say right now in terms of exactly what it is that we should be doing. But it's like I say, it's very difficult, because if you turn on the news, and the news is a disaster, because all it's about is having people go on about how Trump lies and all the rest of it. And yes, he lies, and he lies all the time, but then politicians also lie. And I tend myself to distinguish between what I would call consequential lies and inconsequential lies. Most of Trump's lies are inconsequential. Some of them are very consequential, and we should really confine ourselves to the consequential lies. For example, one of the consequential lies that didn't belong to Donald Trump, but belonged to George Bush the Younger, was the lie that took us into war in Iraq. That lie was has had huge consequences for world history, and we're still living with the consequences of that huge lie. And it actually is interesting about this country. This country has gone to war on the basis of a lie almost every time. Woodrow Wilson promised he would not take the United States to war in World War One. He did, and he did it on a lie. Roosevelt concocted a lie in order to get the United States into World War Two. Maybe these were not bad decisions, but they were based on a lie. Vietnam was based on a lie. The Tonkin Gulf incident. So these are consequential lies, war and death. I think that we should be very careful about being worried all the time about whether Donald Trump lies about forest management or whether he lies about his conversation with somebody else. Those are the kinds of things that seem to me to be mass distractions. And this is, if you like, the most frustrating part, that there are clearly jobs to be done, clearly things to be done. Politically, it's almost impossible right now to get any of this going, get any of this thinking, and the kind of mass movements and mass demonstrations that are required to do this and are hard to orchestrate. And in any case, given the virus, very dangerous to pursue. So this is a time of considerable confusion for people like myself, and it's a difficult time. But at this particular moment, I think the moral imperative takes over from the political project of the long term, which is trying to get us out of this capitalistic system of infinite accumulation and the like. So we'll take up some other aspect of this in the next podcast.
Thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to David Harvey's Anti-Capitalist Chronicles, a Democracy at Work production. A special thank you to the wonderful Patreon community for supporting this project.